David Kelley, well, in the historical sense I met him. He died in 1909. But I met David Kelley when I was working on the Forrest Escort book, which some of you will remember. It came out in '06, and many of you have been told me you enjoyed reading it, which is very kind of you. But on the cover of that book is a picture of David Kelley at one of the reunions. And as I worked on that book, I found so many interesting things about Kelley in connection with the escort and staff. I said, this man deserves some work on his own. So I set to work, and the result is a book that was published by the History Press this last September, Forrest Fighting Preacher. This last Thursday, I was at the Vanderbilt Barnes & Noble bookstore giving a little talk about this topic and talking about David Kelley, and I mentioned at the end that he died at the home of his daughter Daisy at 2501 West End Avenue. And the manager of the bookstore said, that's our address. So I'm glad it was not there for Halloween. If the Reverend Mr. John Kelley had kept a diary, if he did, it did not survive, but if he had kept a diary, I know what he would have written on Christmas Day, 1833. Being a good Methodist minister, his thoughts already would have been running to the prophet Isaiah, and on that day I'm confident he would have written in his diary, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Because on Christmas Day, 1833, John and Margaret Kelley became the parents of their first child, a son, David Campbell Kelley. Named David for two of his grandfathers, one on each side of the family. Campbell, his mother's name, and Kelley, the family name. The Campbells and the Kelleys are old names in Virginia and East Tennessee history. Both the Campbell grandfathers had participated in both the Kelley grandparents had participated in the Revolution. One of them had come down into Tennessee with John Sevier. Campbell Station, just outside Knoxville, was founded by one of David's maternal grandparents. So he was a man with a history on the day that he was born. Now his father, John Kelley, was one of the first Methodist ministers in Wilson County. Started a Methodist church under an oak tree. And the man where he started the church later gave an acre of land with the oak tree on it for them to build a church there. For some reason, they decided that would be the cemetery, and the church was built on a town lot across the street. They built a brick building in the 1840s where John Kelley continued to preach, and that brick building still stands and still in use. It's still today called Kelley's Chapel. The town was called by some people Kelley's Chapel, others just called it Stringtown, because it was strung out along the road from Lebanon on the way toward Nashville. However, a group of young men went off to Virginia in 1861, and when they came home, the remainders of them came home in 1865, they gave the official name to the post office of Leeville. So if you're wanting to go there today, you go to Leeville, Tennessee, also called Kelley's Chapel, one time called Stringtown. As you pass Lebanon on I-40, going toward Nashville, it's the next exit. Tiny little village, but with a lot of history behind it. Now, John Kelley was not a dirt poor circuit rider. He was a fairly prosperous farmer. He had 250 acres of land, and he owned 6 slaves, who incidentally stayed with him until 1867. You might think about that. The household took its religious beliefs quite seriously, and their faith was a matter of action, not just a matter of conversation. Margaret Kelley was very active in the Methodist Church and started the first women's missionary movement in the Methodist Church in the state of Tennessee. She was extremely interested in China and sending missionaries to China. David came from an educated family, and it was expected that he would get an education, and he did. No schools in Wilson County at that time, no public schools, so he studied with tutors. He then visited his Campbell relatives up in southwestern Virginia, spent a little time at Emory and Henry College, came back to Lebanon, enrolled in Cumberland, now Cumberland University, and graduated from there. He stated publicly during his time at Lebanon that he felt a divine call to follow in his father's footsteps, and he was going to become a Methodist minister. However, he also wanted to follow his mother's interests and said he would, in addition, go to China as a missionary. But he wanted to go as one who had more than one skill to offer, So on graduating from Lebanon, he enrolled in the Cumberland at Lebanon. He enrolled in the medical department of the University of Nashville. A man whose name is well known to those of us who like to read history, John Berrien Lindsley, military annals of the state of Tennessee. John Berrien Lindsley was on the faculty, medical faculty, at the University of Nashville at the time Kelley enrolled there. Incidentally, the building where the medical department was still stands there in Nashville. As you come into Nashville on either Interstate 24 or 40, just before the road goes across the Cumberland River, if you will look ahead and to your right, a large stone building stands atop that hill, which is the last remaining building of the old University of Nashville. Kelley said that his medical training did not give him any real trouble. He was not bothered by dissecting cadavers or by performing operations. What bothered him, he said, was trying to preach and go to medical school at the same time. He didn't have enough time to work on sermons. So whenever he was asked to come to a church, he always looked to see if he'd been there before. He had one good sermon. So if he had not been there before, he would go preach for them. If they asked him twice, he was busy. He got caught, however, one time. He was asked to come back to McKendree Methodist in Nashville for the second time. Fortunately, he said, God was merciful, and it was a dark, cold, rainy night, and very few people showed up, so he got away with it. David, on finishing his medical education, decided he wanted to go to China as a married man as well as a missionary doctor, so he literally went hunting for a wife. Having preached at all the Methodist churches around Nashville, he knew a lot of young women who were interested in David Kelley. He was a good-looking young man. He knew a lot who were interested in China, but he did not know any who were interested in both. So he went down to Pulaski, and he preached a revival for a week and talked to all the young women there in the same situation, interested in one or the other, but not in both. So he went down to Florence, Alabama to preach a one-week revival down there, and while there he found someone who was interested in both China and David Kelley at the same time. Her name was Minerva Amanda Harris. She actually was from Waterloo, Alabama. David always called her Manny. After a courtship of 3 weeks, A, this is the 19th century, and B, he's a Methodist preacher, and C, they still went fast, didn't they? So after a courtship of 3 weeks, they were married, and in 1854 they sailed from New York for China, arriving several months later. Talk about the slow boat to China, this was it. Arriving several months later in Shanghai. Now their experience as a missionary couple was not very satisfactory. The language was very difficult to learn. They had not learned it before they went. They were going to learn it on the field. The Chinese were not particularly interested in conversion to Christianity. They had their own religious beliefs, very slow to respond. Their best opportunity to make a convert was the young Chinese woman who kept house for them. She had kept house for several missionaries before them, so she had already heard about the basics of Christianity. The problem she had was one of the missionaries she had worked for was a Baptist, and he had told her she had to be immersed, and she was very modest, and she thought she would look not very decorous standing in front of a congregation in a wringing wet cotton gown. So she refused to become a Christian, and Kelley never could convince her that the Methodists would sprinkle her and it would work just as well. So they left China and made no converts. The high point of their stay there was the birth in 1855 of a daughter named Mamie. Now, incidentally, talk about some touching letters. Here's David's mother writing to her less than 1-year-old granddaughter, Mamie, out in China. Real fine letters. 1855, the couple decided to come home. Manny's health was bad. Converts were few. David said, there's a better way for me to carry out my calling. So they got on the boat to come home. On the way, Mamie died. She was buried at sea. Manny, the wife, was pregnant. When they arrived in New York, she was already experiencing complications, and they had traveled as far south as Richmond, Virginia, all the way home when the second child was born. I do not know if it was stillborn or lived only a few hours, but I do know it was never given a name. It's buried in a now lost grave somewhere in the vicinity of Richmond, Virginia. So it was a very sad couple that arrived in Lebanon, Tennessee in 1857. David, as an itinerant Methodist minister, was assigned to a church for a one-year rotation. So he served 3 churches. In 1859, he served the church in Franklin, Tennessee. In 1860, he's assigned to the Methodist Church in Huntsville, Alabama. But that's a large and prosperous congregation because Huntsville, Madison County, at one time produced more cotton than any other county in the entire state of Alabama. Today they produce engineers, but at one time they produced cotton. I have my own opinion as to which was more useful. Now, for reasons unknown to me, North Alabama is in the Tennessee Conference of the Methodist Church. I think it's because the Tennessee River makes that big swing down there and everything north of the river is in the Tennessee Conference. Because part of western Kentucky is also in the Tennessee Conference, I found out. At any rate, David was still in the Tennessee Conference when he went to Huntsville, Alabama, 1860. Now, we don't know what he thought about the crisis of 1860 with the presidential election because he's a member of the Methodist Episcopal Church South. This is politics, this is religion, the two don't speak to each other. They're totally separate. So David never said anything publicly that has been preserved about what he thought. We do know what he did. A group of young men formed a military company in Huntsville. They went off to Virginia. They fought at First Manassas. It was to this group of young men, the 9th Alabama, that a certain Confederate general turned and said, "There stands Jackson like a stone wall." Those words were spoken to young men from Huntsville, Alabama. So word of that swept through the town, of course, and that summer, after the fight at First Manassas, David Campbell Kelley began to organize a cavalry company from the men of his congregation. One of the men he recruited to serve as the surgeon was a doctor named Mason Maverick Van Wyck, who had lived in the South for a total of 8 months. He was a native of New York, became a surgeon in the Confederate Army. They did their training at Newmarket, Alabama, where there was lots of pasture, lots of open country. And then in September, loaded their horses on the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, which runs through Huntsville, and off they went to Memphis, where they were assigned to a cavalry battalion being raised by a former Memphis alderman and business figure, Nathan Bedford Forrest. I do not think this was an accident. Mrs. Kelley, Margaret Campbell Kelley, was cousins to the Montgomery family. Mrs. Bedford Forrest was Mary Ann Montgomery. Remember, the Bonnie Blue Flag says we are a band of brothers, and it's at least true that we're a band of cousins and in-laws, if nothing else. I think that probably had something to do. At any rate, Forrest and Kelley immediately became not only soldiers at arms together, they became close personal friends. Forrest, out of his own pocket, bought Kelley's cavalry saber and pistol and presented them to him as gifts. The backstrap on the butt of that pistol is engraved MBF to DCK. Held that pistol right there. Hank Williams Jr. let me do that. He owns the pistol and the sword and the sash. So Kelley became professional associates and close personal friends with Forrest. Now, if you think it's odd that Forrest would be a friend of a Methodist minister, let me remind you he was also friends with the Episcopal Bishop of the state of Tennessee, Bishop Odie. There's more to Bedford Forrest than most people think. Now, Kelley, as soon as the battalion is organized, becomes its adjutant. So he is major, he is adjutant, and he and Forrest share the same tent. It was in this connection that Kelley wrote, "We had one table, one tent, family prayers were conducted every evening, and grace was said at every meal. Forrest had absolute confidence in the piety of his mother and his wife, and was himself a thorough believer in Christianity. Throughout the war, he gave me the fullest opportunities for preaching in camp, and was always present at such services himself whenever it was practicable." It was also from Kelley's pen that we get that description of Forrest in battle that has become one of the icons of Confederate literature. Alan Wyeth recorded this in his book, but the footnote points out that he got the information in a letter that Kelley wrote to him. Kelley said of Forrest in battle, his face flushed until it bore a striking resemblance to a painted Indian warrior, and his eyes, usually so mild in their expression, flushed with the intense glare of the panther about to spring on its prey. In fact, he looked as little like the Forrest of our mess table as the storms of December resemble the quiet of June. Now, having resolved to follow the god of battles, and having enlisted under a man who said war means fighting and fighting means killing, Kelley dedicated himself to learning this new profession, and he did it well. At Sacramento, Forrest's first real engagement, it is Forrest who says, I'm going to lead the frontal attack, but Major Kelley, you take 50 men and go around that flank and then circle into the rear. When you get in the rear, I'm going to attack from the front, and that's precisely what happened, and that stampeded the Union opposition at Sacramento. It was to Kelley on that Sacramento campaign that Forrest gave an independent command and said, go up there on the Ohio River, there are 2 gunboats up there protecting some supply boats, run off the gunboats and capture the supplies. Kelley was fighting gunboats as early as December of 1861 and learned that they were like a lot of dogs, their bark was worse than their bite. At Fort Donelson on that second day, when Forrest is helping swing the gate open, Kelley is by his side every step of the way, and frequently is the man set back to bring up reinforcements and lead them into the combat zone. Although the gate was swung open, the Confederates did not go through that gate. When the gate is swung back shut and the decision is made to surrender, and Forrest says, not me, it is Kelley who gets the post of greatest danger. Forrest assigned the advance guard to his own brother, to Jeffrey. Forrest took command of the main body of the regiment, but he said to Kelley, you have the rear guard. You keep them off our back. As soon as we get across the slough, we'll keep them off your back while you get across. It's also Kelley who is left in command of the rear guard at Cumberland Furnace, as Forrest and the rest of the command goes on a little further toward Dixon, get a little more distance. So Kelley is a man who Forrest trusts with the post of danger from the very earliest days of the war. Kelley helps to keep order in Nashville. He is part of the rear guard as the Army falls back to Murfreesboro, and then to Shelbyville, and then to Fayetteville. And Kelley's heart is beating a little faster each step of the way, because the next town down that string of beads is Huntsville, where his wife is waiting. On arriving in Huntsville, Forrest gave the entire unit a 2-week furlough. Now that sounds like utter madness. You've lost a major battle, you've evacuated the state capital, you've retreated over 100 miles, now we're telling everybody to go home for 2 weeks. Who's coming back? But at the end of the 2 weeks, Kelley showed up with more men than he had when he left. There was a good deal of enthusiasm there. Kelley fights alongside Forrest at Shiloh, at Fallen Timbers, where Forrest is fighting that well-known rearguard action. Kelley has command of the 3rd Tennessee, as it now is of regimental size. Kelley has command of the 3rd Tennessee, while Forrest leads a mixed unit of Kentucky and Texas troops in that charge down the hill and out into the muddy area where he stampedes Sherman's pursuing division. Kelley stays and watches, ready again to come to aid if needed. Forrest is wounded, shot at point-blank range, and Kelley then becomes the commander of the 3rd Tennessee. Forrest goes back to Memphis to recuperate. Kelley continues to command the 3rd Tennessee, leading them on numerous patrols and scouting expeditions during this 3-week period. Forrest comes back too soon, has to be operated on by J.B. County. Kelley retains command. Forrest is promoted to brigadier and is sent over here to Chattanooga to rally the cavalry troops to oppose the advance of Don Carlos Buell. Kelley retains command of the 3rd Tennessee, now calling itself Forrest's old regiment, but commanded by Kelley. Kelley had learned his tactics well. Under Frank Armstrong, they fight at Cortland, Alabama, and their opponent is the 1st Ohio Cavalry. The 1st Ohio takes shelter behind a railroad bed, hoping the Confederates are going to attack them in front. Kelley says, I know how to play this game, so he sends a small group up to keep up get their attention and keep them under fire. He has a double envelopment going around both wings, hits them from the rear, and in his report says, we well nigh annihilated the 1st Ohio Cavalry. I wonder who taught him that tactic. But even a strong fighter like Kelley could not defend himself against all enemies. Late summer of 1862, Kelley falls ill with typhoid. Dr. J.B. Cowan signed the certificate, which is part of Kelley's service record, saying that he had to go on medical leave. His life was in imminent danger. So Kelley went to Aberdeen, Mississippi as a medical refugee. Then Braxton Bragg comes here and begins the Kentucky campaign, clearing Middle Tennessee of Union troops, and it is safe for Kelley to go home to Lebanon. He arrived in late September of 1862. I know when he arrived because his mother did keep a diary, which is preserved at the University of Georgia. And for the 25th of September, 1862, she recorded, "Our dear David came home today." His wife would also remember it. Remember that 2-week furlough back in January? That night she gave birth to their first child that lived to adulthood, a daughter named Daisy. Now the next several months are also something of a mystery. Kelley remained at Lebanon until the Union troops returned to Nashville. Then he has to get out of Lebanon. I mean, after all, Bedford Forrest Lieutenant Colonel, second in command, is too tempting a target for the Union provost, so he leaves there. He went back to Huntsville. We know he's in Huntsville preaching at the Methodist Church because the church records tell us that. Also, after capturing Able Strait on his way back from Rome to Spring Hill, Tennessee, the citizens of Huntsville presented Forrest with a horse. And the newspaper accounts say that Kelley made the speech presenting the horse to Forrest. After the Tullahoma campaign, however, Huntsville is under the gun again. We next find Kelley over in Guntersville, Alabama, preaching at a church there. But Guntersville is on the river, easy to attack. So next we find him in the winter of 63-64 at Dalton, one of the ministers preaching to the troops in the revivals in the camps at Dalton. Now by that time, Forrest has been detached from the Army of Tennessee, and he's over in West Tennessee. He's actually moved up into West Tennessee and has occupied Jackson. He will be there for about 6 weeks. In April of 1864, David Kelley rejoins Forrest in active command at Jackson. He arrived shortly after the engagement at Fort Pillow. One of the Confederate casualties at Fort Pillow was a mortally wounded colonel, former pastor of the Cumberland Presbyterian Church in Nashville. He died at Jackson, and his obituary records that the Reverend Colonel David Kelley conducted the service for him in Jackson, Tennessee. Forrest was also having a little bit of nostalgia. That's an emotion we don't associate with Forrest either, is it? But it's true. Forrest wanted that old regiment back together again, because when Forrest was promoted and Kelley then became ill, the 3rd Tennessee was broken up. The Alabama troops became the nucleus of Russell's 4th Alabama. Kentucky troops went to a Kentucky regiment. Texas troops went to a Texas unit. What was left was Backett's battalion, or also Hilliard's battalion of Tennessee troops. Forrest wanted that 3rd Tennessee Regiment back again, and since the Lieutenant Colonel is now back on active duty, he convinced the War Department to let him build on the existing battalion and reconstitute the 3rd Tennessee. So once more, the 3rd Tennessee is back in the saddle, and it's by Forrest's side for all those great battles in Mississippi that summer of 1864. They're at Tupelo, Harrisburg, Bryce's Crossroads. They're at all of them. They do not go on the Memphis raid. They're holding the line and the attention of the Union troops down at Oxford while Forrest goes around their flank and rides into Memphis. They are with Forrest as he comes riding up the Decatur to Nashville Railroad, Athens, Sulphur Creek Trestle, Pulaski, then feinting over in this direction toward Tullahoma. They're with Forrest at Johnsonville. And after Johnsonville, Kelley is given an independent command to stop a gunboat attack that's trying to go go up the river and get in Forrest's rear before Forrest can get to Florence, Alabama to recross. Kelley goes to Eastport, Mississippi and ambushes the Union force there. Let me describe this for you just briefly because Kelley shows his ability as an independent commander. He has with him 2 regiments and 2 pieces of artillery. Eastport is today a very tiny little community not far from Corinth. It is on the banks of the Tennessee River, but it was the port of entry for Corinth, both entry and exit for river. Now, the Tennessee there, as it does here, tends to cut well down below the surface of the land, so its banks are bluffs. The steamboat landing at Eastport is about the width of this room, and it's where a gully runs down from the surrounding plateau down through the bluff to the surface of the river, and there's a little beach, if you will. Now remember, these 19th century riverboats had the gangplank in the bow. They would nose into the bank and drop the gangplank from the bow. So two of them could come in there abreast and drop their gangplank. Kelley puts one piece of artillery on the bluff on each side, hiding them in weeds and bushes. He puts his two regiments dismounted far enough back that they cannot be seen. He waits until the troops begin to disembark. They've disembarked 3 companies as an advance guard, 2 pieces of artillery, 2 more are sitting on the gangplank, and the other one is crowded with men. When Kelley shouts fire, 2 blasts of double canister come in from the sides, and his 2 regiments come rushing up and open fire in the space about the width of this room. Well, it's another stampede, trying to get back on the boats, and instead there's no place else to go because there's no beach along the sides of those bluffs, so it's the devil or the devil's preacher. I should have said the devil of the deep blue sea, except it's the muddy Tennessee River, but it is the devil's parson right there. Literally giving the Yankees hell, if you will. They remembered that for a long time to come because Kelley and 2 regiments captured a battery and 175 prisoners, plus the casualties who fell into the river or who were killed in the combat. That opens the way, incidentally, not only for Forrest to get across the river, it also opens the way for John Bell Hood to get across the river at Florence. So Kelley is with the advance guard up through Spring Hill and Franklin. Forrest goes down to Murfreesboro to fight, but Kelley holds the extreme left flank of the Confederate line at a place still called Kelley's Point. He is again given 250 men, 3rd Tennessee Cavalry, and he is given, this time, 4 pieces of artillery, 2 10-pound rifles, and 2 12-pound Napoleons. With that, he is supposed to block the Cumberland River. There are 10 U.S. gunboats in Nashville trying to escort supply vessels out to bring in additional reinforcements. Kelley chose his position well. He chose a bluff. Now remember the design flaw of those gunboats. If you make the gun port large enough that you can elevate and hit the top of the bluff, you have such a large opening, the gun crew is vulnerable to rifle fire. If you make it small enough that the gun crew is protected, you cannot elevate and hit the top of the bluff. So Kelley chose the top of a bluff where he can depress enough to hit the water, but they cannot elevate enough to hit him. There's nothing in the rules of war that says you got to let them shoot back. This was the largest naval engagement ever fought on the Cumberland River. This is bigger than Fort Donelson. There were only 7 U.S. gunboats at Fort Donelson. Kelley stopped 10 for 3 days at Nashville. And at the end of the 3rd day, they went back to Nashville and tied to the wharf and stayed there. When the Battle of Nashville starts, however, Kelley has to make a strategic withdrawal because between his 250 men and the left flank of the Confederate Army is 5 miles of open country. There's not even a picket post out there. He gets back in time, however, to join the stand at Shias Hill on the 2nd day of the battle, and is the right man in the right place at the right time. Because when the Granny White Pike line collapses, Kelley literally drives the cork in the bottle. He leads the cavalry force that plugs the Gourd Hollow Pass, allowing the remnants of the Army of Tennessee to escape toward Franklin and then all the way back to the Tennessee River. Kelley stays with the Army for that last bitter winter. There are many letters written home talking about how there would be 200 or 300 men sitting on logs out in the woods waiting for Kelley to come preach to them. He was very active in his ministerial duties. He is not at Selma. He has been assigned to another post at that point. His regiment is a few miles north of Selma, guarding a road down which they do not come. But he is with Forrest at Gainesville when the surrender takes place on the 26th of May. Incidentally, there were no U.S. troops present when Forrest's command surrendered. Paroles had already been signed and sent to the Confederate adjutants, So on the morning of the 26th of May, the order was given to fall in. They answered roll call. Then the order was to place your weapons in the company ordnance wagon, draw your parole, and go home. That was it. It was 3 days before any U.S. soldier showed up to claim the weapons. Some folks, you don't want to be around them when they're in a bad mood. Kelley went back to preaching. But now how does the preacher get paid in this devastated economy? It was a very tough 3 years. Kelley and his wife, Manny, did have 2 more children. Daisy now has 2, a brother and another sister. But then tragedy struck again in 1868 when Manny died, hemorrhaging to death following the birth of another child who died with the mother. Manny is buried in the Cedar Cemetery in Lebanon. Her tombstone says 2 children went to heaven before she died. A third now lies by the mother's side. And her tombstone has on it a carving of a woman with her arm around a baby. David moved to Tulip Street Methodist Church in Nashville, and he would spend the balance of his life in Nashville. He also got married again within 6 months. He married a distant cousin, Mary Owen Campbell. Now, she is the daughter of Governor Campbell, or perhaps you know him as Brigadier General Campbell of the United States Army. He was on the other side during the war, so this should have made for some interesting in-law relationships. I have a sneaking suspicion, however, that Mary Owen is the girl David Campbell Kelley had loved all along, because they had flirted quite a bit before he married Manny. She went to China with him. At any rate, Kelley now throws himself into his work in the church. Incidentally, he and Mary Owen would have 4 more children, so there would be 7 children who lived to adulthood, but then 6 of them died before David did. He outlived 6 of his 8 adult children. Kelley was a great supporter of education. One of the schools he supported very strongly was Fisk University. He thought that the South could not afford to have an uneducated class of people, that an uneducated class of people would drag everybody down. So he said we need education for the freed people as well as for ourselves. It was in 1870, however, that David Kelley stood up at the Methodist Conference when it met and said the Methodist Conference of Tennessee should found a university. And his bishop, Holland McTire, said, that's a very good idea. My wife is related to Frank Armstrong. That's where we'll get the money. Frank Armstrong is a she. You know her as Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt. She had lived in Mobile, Alabama, and had worked in a Confederate hospital there. After the war, she had to leave Mobile because the economy was devastated. She went to New York, met the old Commodore, and he married her. Now, he is approximately 47 years older than she is. I think in today's society we call that a trophy wife. But her uncle was Bishop Holland McTire of the Methodist Church, so I've got a pretty good idea, church politics being what they are, that this thing had been worked out in advance. So Kelley's going to make the motion. The bishop already knows where the money's going to come from. David Campbell Kelley would remain chairman of the board of trust for Vanderbilt University for 30 years. During this time, he would be a champion of academic freedom. On one occasion, they were going to fire a man named Alexander Winchell because he had delivered a lecture on what he called the pre-Adamites. He said God must have created people other than Adam and Eve because Adam's sons married somebody that didn't marry their sisters. So there were other people. And the board of trust was going to fire him, and there was only one dissenting vote, and that was David Campbell Kelley, who said, I may not agree with this man, but he ought to be allowed to say what he thinks. The high point for me, however, for David Campbell Kelley being still a maverick, came on November the 3rd, 1887, when the Vendome Theater opened at 615 Church Street in Nashville. Well, that's the current location of the Nashville Public Library. You probably have seen it. 1 block down is McKendree Methodist Church, which at that time had a new pastor, a man named Warren Aiken Candler. I don't see any views of recognition. Nobody here drinks Coca-Cola? All right, there you go. One of them Candler boys became a millionaire, and the other one became a Methodist preacher. All right. The Coca-Cola Candler is the brother of the Methodist Candler, who would later become a bishop. Candler School of Theology, founded by the preacher, but endowed by his brother. Candler was furious because when the Vendome Theater had opened that week, Many members of the McKendree congregation had showed up at the opening performance. So this Sunday he preached a blistering sermon on the heinous sin of going to the theater. When he finished, a young woman stood up in the audience. It was Emma Abbott, the leading actress from the performance that had been put on at the Vendome, and the best-known opera singer in the entire United States. And she literally shook her finger in the preacher's face and said, "I'm as good a Christian as you are. And if you want some examples of sinful ministers, I can give you some." When she finished, there was a round of applause from the congregation. The closing hymn was "All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name." Now, can you imagine what a trained operatic soprano could do with that hymn? She sang it basically as a solo, and at the end there was another round of applause. And when she got down the street to her room at the Maxwell House Hotel, there was a large bouquet of flowers already waiting for her. Candler, of course, was furious. Became even more so the next morning when in all 4 of the Nashville newspapers, can you imagine 4 newspapers in Nashville in 1887, there appeared an anonymous letter saying, "She's right, he's wrong." This caused an enormous furor in the Methodist Church, so much so that 2 weeks later, a rather timid David Campbell Kelley had to say, "I wrote the letter." He was in quite a bit of trouble with that with the bishops for quite a while. He ran for governor in 1890 on the prohibition ticket. Now, what was this about? This is politics and this is religion, and the two don't speak. Kelley had decided they should not only speak, they should shake hands. So he ran for governor on the prohibition ticket and had to stand trial for heresy as a result. Incidentally, the bishops voted 16-0 against him. The pastors at the conference voted 125-0 in favor of him. After that, they changed church law so that a pastor cannot be tried by a panel of bishops, but has to be tried by a panel of pastors. 1889, the United Confederate Veterans was founded, and David Campbell Kelley took the lead in that organization. He also took the lead in founding the Sons of the American Revolution chapter in the state of Tennessee. He took the lead in raising money for the Forrest statue in Memphis. And in 1905, when that statue was dedicated, Kelley gave the benediction at the conclusion of that ceremony. Kelley outlived most of the men of his generation. He remained active as a pastor, as a writer, as a church mission advocate, and a public speaker until the last 6 days of his life, when he became too weak to continue to function. And as an itinerant Methodist pastor, had never owned his own house. So since he could no longer be a pastor, he went to the home of his daughter, Daisy, who incidentally had married a young man named Lambeth. If you're a Methodist, you know the name Lambeth. And there, on May the 9th, 1909, he died. Throughout his long and active life, he was a man who was always at the forefront of the fight. He had the ability and the willingness to lead, whether it was in battle or in the church or in the United Confederate Veterans. He was always at the front. He always had used as his motto the phrase, "Go or die," because his idea was if you stand still, you may as well be dead. He was truly a fighting preacher of the First Order. I will briefly entertain a couple of questions if you would like to, for Commander's discretion.
Question. Anybody have any questions?
Well, I certainly said enough. I don't know if I said it all, but I said enough. Thank you all for your very kind hospitality. I've enjoyed coming over, except when I got caught in the traffic. That was kind of boring.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley.